0101. Welcome, friend. I'm glad you're here. Let's take a gentle step back through time into a world that feels distant but is still deeply human. Whether you're winding down for sleep or simply looking for a moment of stillness, I'm grateful to share this quiet hour with you. Let me know where you're listening from, your city, your country, maybe even the time of night. It always amazes me how the stories of the past connect people from every corner of the present. If calm, reflective storytelling helps ease your mind, consider subscribing. We have so many more tales that can help cradle us into rest. Now, we all joke about how frustrating modern dating can be. Awkward texts, unmatched expectations, coffee dates that go nowhere. But imagine just for a moment that your biggest dating fear wasn't being ghosted, but whether your crush would survive winter, or that meeting the parents meant negotiating with a landowning feudal lord who literally held authority over your beloved's life. Picture a world where romance came second to survival, and your biggest turn-on might be someone not showing signs of scurvy or leprosy. The truth is, dating during the medieval period was so bleak and brutal that it makes today's most cringeworthy dating app stories feel like rom-com plotlines. In that time, love wasn't just complicated. It was rare, dangerous, and often impossible. Most people didn't marry for passion. They married for livestock, land, or alliances, and the average person had about as much agency in their love life as cattle being bartered at a rural fair. Tonight, we'll explore why falling in love in medieval times was more nightmare than fairy tale. From class-based restrictions that turned romance into a power game, to religious doctrines that dictated how, when, and why you could express desire, and even how poor hygiene made physical attraction a full-time challenge. But perhaps the most unsettling realization? Many of the dating troubles we view as modern actually trace back to these very medieval origins. The societal pressure to marry young, that's medieval. The idea of arranged unions designed more for stability than happiness, also medieval. Even the belief that true love must be dramatic, forbidden, and soul-wrenching. That was born from medieval courtly love traditions, romantic ideals crafted to be unattainable on purpose. So, where do we begin? Well, let's start with a concept that would make today's endless swiping on dating apps seem like a utopia. The total lack of choice in medieval romantic life. Think your dating pool is limited now? Imagine being born into a tiny village of maybe 50 people. Half of them are your cousins, a chunk are already married, a few are infants or elders, and the rest might be off limits due to family arrangements or lordly intervention. In medieval society, who you could love wasn't decided by shared interests or chemistry. It was decided by social hierarchy, land rights, dowries, and decisions made by people who often never even asked what you wanted. The notion of dating casually, getting to know different people, or, heaven forbid, marrying for affection, wasn't just unusual, it was dangerous, even heretical. For peasants who made up the vast majority of the population, romance was a luxury far out of reach. When every waking hour is devoted to survival, when a failed harvest might starve your family, and when your life is bound to the land you till, finding love ranks far below finding food. Most marriages were arranged. Families looked for partners who could work the fields, bring livestock as a dowry, or survive childbirth long enough to bear laborers of the next generation. Love? That was a frivolous distraction, an indulgence, a risk. And here's the unsettling part. Even if you did fall in love with someone, genuinely, tenderly, that didn't mean you'd be allowed to marry them. Feudal lords often had final say over the unions of those who worked their land. If marrying someone from another village meant losing a strong worker, your lord might simply deny the match. Not for moral reasons, but economic ones. But maybe you're thinking, well, at least the nobility had it easier, right? Actually, in many ways, they had it worse. If peasant marriages were built on practicality, noble marriages were built on pure political calculation. Every wedding was a chess move, a military pact, a land deal sealed with a kiss. Especially for noble daughters, marriage was rarely a personal decision. It was a strategy. A girl might be promised to a man twice, or 3 times her age, someone she'd never met, purely because that union would secure a border, bring peace to warring houses, or absorb another family's fortune. Her opinion didn't matter, and voicing unhappiness, that could be interpreted as disloyalty, even treason. And here's where things take a deeply disturbing turn. Our modern ideas of childhood didn't really exist back then. Girls could be promised in marriage at 7, and by the time they were 12 or 13, once considered of marriageable age, they were expected to leave behind play and innocence to become wives and mothers. Often to men decades older, often with no choice. These weren't childhood sweethearts, they were children, bound by family and politics, pushed into adult lives far too soon. A girl could meet her future husband once at a betrothal ceremony, and by the time they wed, she was expected to run a household, produce heirs, and play her role in a political network she barely understood. The statistics are chilling. Many of these young women didn't survive childbirth. Their bodies weren't developed enough, but the pressure to produce sons meant one pregnancy was quickly followed by another, and another, until either a male heir was born, or the mother died trying. Noblemen, especially younger sons, didn't have it easy either. If you weren't the heir, your family might shove you into the church, not because you had a calling, but because there was nothing else for you to inherit. That meant giving up any chance at romantic life altogether. Yet, despite this grim reality, the medieval era gave birth to a romantic ideal we're still grappling with today: courtly love. This wasn't the love you'd find in marriage. It was the love of poetry, of longing, of impossible devotion. A knight might fall in love with a married noblewoman and spend years performing grand chivalric gestures for her, without ever expecting to consummate the relationship. These stories weren't about fulfillment. They were about suffering, about loving so intensely and so fruitlessly that the pain became the point. It was a social valve, a fantasy, a way to channel romantic yearning in a society where love had no safe place to live. But this fantasy left a lasting legacy. It gave us the idea that love should hurt, that it should be difficult, tragic, and full of yearning, that easy, joyful relationships must be shallow. And those beliefs still echo today, and we haven't even touched the topic of hygiene yet. The simple physical experience of being close to someone in medieval times? Not exactly romantic. Most people didn't bathe regularly. In fact, many believed too much bathing could make you sick. Toothbrushes didn't exist, neither did toothpaste. People masked body odor by rubbing herbs on their skin, or not at all. The result? Breath that could stun a goat, skin diseases like scrofula, sores, boils, rashes, and tooth rot by your mid-20s. And yet, amid all this hardship, the church taught that desire itself, especially female desire, was sinful. That even within marriage, pleasure was suspect. A woman who enjoyed intimacy might be accused of moral weakness, or even demonic influence. Men were expected to control their urges. Women were expected to barely have any. All this created a culture where affection, connection, even simple touch were viewed with suspicion, as though love itself was something dangerous. And this was just the beginning. So tonight, let's walk slowly through the shadows of history. Let's uncover how the medieval world turned romance into a gauntlet of class, control, and constraint, and why the most natural human emotion became one of the most dangerous to express. As the first light of dawn crept over the crooked rooftops and muddy paths of medieval villages, the grim truths of love and courtship were laid bare. Truths far more terrifying than any ghosted text or awkward coffee date. Because in this world, love didn't just come with emotional risk. It came with physical danger, life-threatening, ever-present peril that could turn even the most innocent stroll or stolen glance into a gamble with death. Imagine for a moment that you're a peasant girl of about 15. Your family has arranged for you to take Sunday walks with the son of a nearby farmer, always under the sharp watch of your aunt or mother, of course. You might get a few moments to talk, to smile, to dream. But the ground you walk on is more than just uneven. It's a literal minefield. The village lanes beneath your feet aren't paved. They aren't even dry. They're ankle-deep in filth. Human waste, animal droppings, rotting food, and weeks of unwashed debris create a slick, stinking stew that clings to your shoes and chokes the air. Pigs and chickens roam freely, contributing their share to the chaos. And in the summer heat, the stench becomes so overwhelming that people collapse from the fumes alone. But smell is the least of your problems. Every breath you take, every step you make, exposes you to invisible killers. Cholera in the water, typhoid in the food, dysentery spreading from a casual handshake. The infamous Black Death may have been the most dramatic plague of the era, but it was just one of many diseases ready to snatch life without warning. And yet, despite this biological battleground, you're expected to flirt, to find a partner, to make a good impression. How do you flirt with someone who might be incubating the plague? How do you smile sweetly when the reek of decay and sickness hangs in the air like fog? Forget holding hands. Sharing a cup of ale wasn't a cute moment. It was a form of Russian roulette. And kissing? If you got close enough, you'd be greeted not with butterflies, but with breath so foul it could strip paint. Dental hygiene didn't exist. Teeth blackened, rotted, and fell out. Gums were infected. Mouths bled. And no one thought anything of it. Let's say, by some miracle, you found someone who made you laugh. Someone whose eyes sparkled through the grime. You chose to look past the smells, the sores, the scabs, the fleas. That doesn't mean the danger ends there. Medieval architecture was an accident waiting to happen. Buildings leaned, walls buckled, roofs caved in. Construction standards? There were none. And since most homes were made from wood and thatch, a single spark from an indoor cooking fire could burn down half a village before anyone noticed. So your candlelit date night could end in disaster. Literally. Then there were the human threats. The kind that smiled during courtship and turned cruel after the vows. Violence wasn't just a background feature of medieval life. It was stitched into the social fabric. Men were expected to be dominant. Women were expected to be submissive. Domestic abuse wasn't just common, it was condoned. A husband could beat his wife without legal consequence, as long as he didn't kill her. There were no shelters, no safe exits, and no rights to fall back on. Marriage was for life, no matter how that life looked once the door was closed. And intimacy. That too came with terrifying risks. Without modern knowledge of reproduction, without contraception, without antibiotics or prenatal care, sex was dangerous, especially for women. Pregnancy was a gamble, one in which death was a likely outcome. Some estimates say that between 1 in 10 and 1 in 4 women died during childbirth. And if you survived, congratulations, you were likely pregnant again within a few months. Again and again and again, until your body gave out or your luck ran dry. On average, women birthed 6 or 7 children, but many of those babies didn't survive infancy. The mortality rate for children was so high that parents often waited months before naming a newborn, unsure if they'd live long enough to deserve one. Imagine the toll that takes on the body, the mind, the spirit, the endless cycle of hope and grief, of pregnancy and loss, of watching your children fade before your eyes and knowing that you're next. Even if a woman lived through it all, if she found a kind partner, if she endured childbirth after childbirth, she still had to face another brutal fact. Life itself was short and unpredictable. Most people didn't grow old. They didn't retire. They didn't celebrate golden anniversaries. The average life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40 years, not because people aged faster, but because disease, starvation, violence, and accidents took them early. If you reached your 50s, you were ancient, a rarity, a legend in your village. This meant that many relationships, no matter how hopeful or joyful, ended in tragedy. You might marry at 15 and be widowed by 25, or find love, only to have it ripped away by plague, or a fall from a ladder, or an infected wound. There was no guarantee of tomorrow, no time to ease into love, and yet people still loved. They still sang songs and whispered poetry. They still risked punishment, poverty, and pain for a single chance at affection. Perhaps it was because they knew how fragile everything was that they held on to love so tightly. A glance, a hand brushing another, a kiss stolen in shadow, each became more sacred than a lifetime together in a safer age. In that way, medieval love was more intense, more desperate, more fleeting. It had to be, but it also made romance volatile, dramatic, high stakes, because when death is always around the corner, love becomes a final act of defiance, a declaration that something beautiful can bloom in even the darkest soil. This wasn't just about surviving, it was about daring to connect, even when everything told you not to. The hazards of medieval dating weren't just inconveniences, they were existential threats. From childbirth to disease, from fire to violence, from legal constraints to social traps, everything conspired against emotional intimacy. And yet, the flame still flickered. As we continue our journey into the twisted world of medieval courtship, we'll begin to see how all these threats, physical, social, spiritual, wove together into something even more insidious, a system, a design, a centuries-long campaign to control who could love, how they could love, and why that love almost never ended well. Because in the medieval world, love was never just personal. It was power, it was property, it was punishment, and the very idea that two people might find each other and choose to be together freely and joyfully was more than rare. It was revolutionary. Nursemino 103. While clan feuds, religious dogma, and rigid social rules made daily life oppressive, it was in the realm of love and relationships where the harshness of medieval life truly revealed itself. If you thought modern romance was tricky, filled with mixed signals, dating apps, and ghosting, imagine a world where even a simple kiss could ruin your life, or, worse, end it. This wasn't just about a lack of freedom in choosing a partner. This was a full-scale dismantling of intimacy, dressed up in ritual and righteousness, blessed by church authorities and enforced by family duty. A world where the very idea of falling in love freely was treated with suspicion or outright contempt. Let's start at the beginning, the simplest element of any romantic connection, physical closeness. In the Middle Ages, even casual physical contact between unmarried people was a scandal. The Catholic Church preached that touching, kissing, or even longing glances could corrupt the soul and invite eternal damnation. Passion, desire, attraction, these weren't expressions of human connection. They were threats, sins, gateways to hell. But the fear wasn't just spiritual, it was physical too. In an era with no understanding of disease transmission, sex was more than taboo. It was lethal. Sexually transmitted infections moved silently and swiftly through communities. There was no medicine, no awareness, and no way to protect yourself. Diseases like syphilis, which would eventually sweep across Europe, caused devastating physical decay, rotting flesh, madness, death. People wasted away, their bodies transformed by invisible forces they couldn't name, and their suffering often blamed on sin or divine punishment. And for women, sex came with an additional burden: pregnancy. In a world without prenatal care or safe delivery practices, childbirth was less a joyful occasion and more a trial by fire. One a woman might not survive. Maternal mortality rates were horrifying. In some areas, 1 in 3 women died during or shortly after childbirth. The lack of understanding about female anatomy made things worse. Medieval physicians believed women were inferior versions of men, cold, wet, emotionally unstable, and they based treatments on balancing bodily humors rather than biological reality. Bleeding a pregnant woman to release excess heat? Normal. Giving her herbs that were actually toxic? Common. Labor pain was considered a punishment from God for Eve's original sin. If you screamed too loudly, some believed you lacked spiritual strength. Attempts to ease the pain were discouraged or forbidden. After all, pain was seen as part of your holy penance. But let's say you survived courtship. You avoided illness. You got through childbirth alive. What came next wasn't love. It was a contract, a transaction. Marriage in medieval society was never meant to be a romantic union. It was an agreement between families, with the bride treated as a bargaining chip. Dowries were negotiated like cattle prices. The girl's feelings, irrelevant. Her wishes, never asked. In many cases, she met her husband for the first time at the wedding ceremony. Or worse, she knew him, disliked him, but had no power to refuse. It didn't matter if he was cruel or terrifying. What mattered was his name, his property, his alliances. Some girls were promised at age 6, married by 12, and pregnant by 13. These weren't isolated cases. They were expected patterns among the nobility. Being born into wealth didn't shield you from exploitation. In fact, it often made it worse. Take Margaret Beaufort, for example. Married at 12, mother to future King Henry VII at 13. The traumatic labor permanently damaged her body. She never had another child. That was nobility. For peasant girls, things weren't much better. While they had slightly more choice in partners, those choices were still limited by survival. Staying unmarried often meant poverty, danger, and social rejection. A woman alone had no legal standing, no way to earn a living, and no protection from assault. Marriage wasn't just a life milestone, it was a lifeline. And if romance did happen to bloom, if two people genuinely fell in love, they often had to hide it, because love, when not arranged or sanctioned, was dangerous. That's how the idea of courtly love emerged, a strange, poetic, tortured tradition built on fantasy and impossibility. It celebrated forbidden passion, not marital devotion. The knight who adored the queen from afar, the lady who pined for a man she could never have. These were the love stories of the time, not because they were ideal, but because they were unattainable, safe. They posed no threat to the social order because they were never meant to come true. Consider Lancelot and Guinevere, star-crossed lovers doomed from the start. Their love is considered noble, even holy, precisely because it's impossible. If it were fulfilled, it would destroy everything. That's the lesson medieval literature teaches over and over again. True love leads to ruin. Romance didn't belong in marriage, and marriage wasn't built for romance. The church's teachings only made this divide deeper. On one hand, marriage was a sacred sacrament. On the other, sexual pleasure, even in marriage, was considered sinful unless it was for procreation. Passion was suspect, enjoyment a moral failure. Medieval confession manuals listed sexual sins with disturbing detail. Certain positions were outlawed. Certain days, Sundays, feast days, holy days, were off limits. Some manuals warned couples against intimacy on more than half the days of the year. And even then, it had to be joyless, dutiful. If a woman enjoyed sex, she was thought to be dominated by her base, animal nature. If a man pursued celibacy, like monks or priests, he was seen as spiritually superior. Regular husbands, they were viewed as morally compromised, unable to control their urges. In this framework, even consensual, affectionate intimacy was poisoned by shame. Desire became something to suppress. Joy became something to fear. And all of this was supported by law. Women were not legal persons, they were property. First owned by their fathers, then transferred to their husbands. They couldn't own land, sign contracts, or even appear in court without male representation. Weddings reflected this. Fathers literally handed their daughters to the groom, as if passing along a valuable object. The bride often had no voice in the ceremony at all. She was a symbol, not a participant. Marital rape didn't exist as a concept, because once a woman was married, her consent was assumed, permanently. A husband could force himself on his wife at will, and society considered that his right. Abuse was legal, literally. As long as a man didn't maim or kill his wife, he could beat her. In fact, some medieval laws included clauses like the rule of thumb, allowing men to strike their wives with sticks so long as the stick wasn't thicker than their thumb. Divorce? Essentially impossible. And even if a woman somehow escaped, she would lose her home, her children, her safety. Her only other option? Become a nun, which required a dowry, or wall herself into a church cell and live the rest of her life in isolation and prayer. Neither offered freedom, only escape. Most women had no choices, no voice, and no way out. Even love itself wasn't safe. Medieval medicine considered love a mental illness, something called love sickness. Symptoms included insomnia, anxiety, obsession, loss of appetite. The cure? Bloodletting, laxatives, purges. Some believed that staring at someone too long could lodge their image in your brain like a disease. Physicians recommended avoiding your crush entirely. Redirect your thoughts, distract yourself, because love wasn't an emotion, it was a condition, and conditions could be treated. Imagine being young, vulnerable, full of feeling, and told that those feelings made you sick, that you needed help, that something was wrong with you, that love itself was dangerous, and the pressures didn't end there. Peasants worked from dawn to dusk just to survive. Starvation, sickness, and poverty loomed constantly. Couples might marry, fall in love, have children, but then watch helplessly as their families wasted away. Infant deaths were common. Many children didn't live past their first year. Winter brought disease, summer brought famine. There was no season without grief. Even among nobles, love was stifled by politics. Public displays of affection could signal dangerous alliances. A smile at the wrong moment might make you a target. Couples weren't left alone. Ever. Their lives were chaperoned, guarded, and analyzed. Real intimacy was almost impossible. So if people loved, and they did, it was in spite of everything, not because of it. The entire structure of medieval romance was designed to suppress human connection, and yet people kept trying. They whispered, they hoped, they held hands when no one was looking, because even in a world that punished desire and mocked tenderness, the human heart kept beating, and those beats, soft, defiant, and brave, echoed through centuries of silence. They remind us that love, even when shackled and shamed, finds a way to survive. There was one warfare. Now, if you thought arranged marriages and oppressive customs were the worst parts of medieval romance, brace yourself. Because beyond the rigid roles, the dangerous childbirths, and the toxic religious teachings, there lay something even more chilling. A world ruled by superstition, fear, and accusations that could turn even innocent affection into a death sentence. Imagine falling in love quietly, hoping, in secret, that someone might notice you back. You pluck a flower, tuck a ribbon in your hair, say a quiet prayer before bed. Harmless gestures, right? Not in the Middle Ages. These small acts could brand you a witch. Superstition seeped into every crack of medieval life, including love, especially love. Romantic feelings, especially when intense or sudden, were often seen not as natural emotions, but as evidence of magic, a spell, a curse. People genuinely believed that falling in love too fast might mean you'd been bewitched, and the target of suspicion was almost always a woman. If she was unusually pretty, unusually clever, or just didn't fit the mold, she could be accused of seducing men through supernatural means. A woman who lived alone, suspicious. A woman with knowledge of herbs or healing, dangerous. A woman who turned down a suitor, clearly cursed. Take the case of Isabel, a young woman who did nothing more than braid rosemary into her hair, something her grandmother taught her as a charm for good luck. It wasn't magic, it wasn't rebellion, it was tradition. But in a time when the line between healing and hexing was paper thin, Isabel's small ritual was enough to raise alarm. Whispers turned into rumors, and rumors into accusations. In some villages, that alone could end in trial and fire. Love itself, in the eyes of many medieval people, wasn't just risky, it was suspicious. The church had already taught that lust was a deadly sin, so if someone found themselves passionately, overwhelmingly in love, they didn't celebrate it. They feared it. They questioned whether the devil might be tempting them, whether the object of their affection was some sort of demon in disguise. Men feared their own desires, women feared their independence. Everyone feared the consequences. Even gift-giving carried dangerous connotations. A lock of hair, a ring, a pressed flower. All could be seen not as symbols of affection, but as ingredients for a love spell. If a relationship soured or someone grew jealous, those same tokens could be twisted into evidence of witchcraft. There was no safe expression of emotion, no gesture without risk. And the legal system, it didn't protect you, it hunted you. In most parts of medieval Europe, being accused of love magic or romantic sorcery flipped the rules of justice. You had to prove your innocence, often while enduring torture. A woman who bewitched a man could be burned, drowned, or hanged. And it didn't take much, just a broken heart, a lost proposal, or a rejected suitor. Agnes Waterhouse was one such woman. An elderly widow in 16th century England, she was known for her herbal remedies. Some called her wise, others strange. When a handful of young men in her village faced romantic misfortunes, they blamed her. Accusations followed. No real evidence was needed. She was convicted of witchcraft and executed. Stories like hers were tragically common. Even weddings weren't safe from superstition. Brides were draped in specific colors, not just for fashion, but to ward off evil. Herbs were stuffed into bouquets to protect against curses. Some wedding beds were surrounded by salt or iron objects to keep demons away on the wedding night. That night itself, a minefield of rituals. Some believed you needed to consummate the marriage before sunrise to avoid infertility curses. Others feared that jealous spirits might disrupt the act entirely. The fear ran so deep that entire communities would sometimes watch for signs of misfortune in a new couple. Sick animals, dying crops, sudden storms. If something went wrong, suspicion often fell on the bride. Had she done something unnatural? Used a charm? Hidden a secret? It sounds absurd now, but in a world without science, magic explained the unexplainable. And love, in all its intensity and mystery, was often the most unexplainable thing of all. Even the act of saying no to love came with risk. A woman who rejected an arranged match, who showed preference for someone unsuitable, or who refused to marry at all might be accused of being possessed, or worse, being the one who did the possessing. Exorcisms were conducted not just for illness, but for rebellion. Some women were locked away, starved or beaten in the name of driving out demons that weren't there. All of this fear, all this ritual, all this violence, woven through something as human, as vulnerable, as delicate as the desire to love. And it didn't just affect women. Men too could be consumed by this fear. If they fell for someone passionately, they might worry they were under a spell. A nobleman who broke an engagement might claim he had been magically seduced to avoid social fallout. In court, this was taken seriously. The idea that love could be a trap wasn't metaphor, it was legal reality. Even royalty wasn't immune. Kings and queens surrounded their marriages with rituals, counterspells, and spiritual advisors. Court physicians were tasked with detecting curses. Rival kingdoms might be accused of using magic to sabotage royal unions or cause infertility. The belief in love potions, hexes, and the evil eye spanned all classes, all regions. Fairs, festivals, and church gatherings, places meant for joy, became breeding grounds for suspicion. Families kept daughters close. Young women were warned to avoid looking too pretty, too confident, too happy, because anything could be twisted. Anything could be used against you. The impact of all this fear was enormous. It fractured communities, it silenced women, it criminalized emotion, and it stripped the act of falling in love of its joy, turning it into something terrifying. Even healthy affection could spark jealousy, scandal, or retribution. And yet, people still fell in love. They still wrote poems and letters, still carved initials into trees, still whispered beneath windows at night. They held hands under moonlight. They risked their lives for kisses and glances, because the heart wants what it wants, even in a world that punishes it. Perhaps that's what makes medieval love stories so haunting. Not the dragons or the swords, but the fact that people tried, desperately, hopelessly, fiercely, to love in a world that gave them every reason not to. And maybe that's why their stories, however tragic, still echo today. Because when everything in the world tells you not to feel, and you feel anyway, that's more than bravery. That's love in its purest, most fragile form. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes those long-ago romances so achingly beautiful. 70105. Even in the midst of all the suffering, superstition, and institutional cruelty, love still fought to survive. But in the medieval world, even courtship, the very beginning of a potential romance, was fraught with danger. Not the awkward kind, like tripping over your words or accidentally texting your ex. No, this was a much darker game, because trying to pursue someone romantically in this era could cost you your reputation, your freedom, or even your life. Courtship wasn't a dance of flirtation. It was a battlefield, not of sweet gestures, but of political landmines, social sabotage, and family alliances. Marriages were arranged like treaties, and if you dared to bypass that system with feelings of your own, you risked far more than embarrassment. Imagine being a young man in 14th century England, the son of a minor knight. You fall in love with Margaret, the daughter of a rival family. Your romance begins in secret, glances across the manor hall, whispered conversations in candlelit corners, the quiet thrill of passing a note or a token. But when Margaret's father discovers the budding affection, his fury is immediate and deadly. To him, his daughter isn't a person with feelings. She's a chess piece, reserved for strategic play. Thomas, the boy who dared to love her, had violated sacred ground. He had stolen from the family treasury, because in this world, a daughter's heart wasn't hers to give. The father challenges Thomas to single combat, and in the muddy field where they duel, both men fall, wounded beyond healing. One dies from blood loss, the other from infection days later. Margaret, the girl they fought over, is married off weeks after the funeral to a man 3 times her age. This wasn't rare. This was expected. Young people quickly learned their feelings were liabilities, that affection could spark blood feuds, that looking at the wrong person could mean scandal, exile, or arranged marriage to someone deemed more appropriate. And even when families supported a match, the courtship process itself was laced with peril. Consider the practice of bundling in Northern Europe, a tradition where a courting couple would be allowed to lie in bed together, fully clothed, often separated by a wooden plank or a sewn-up sack. The idea was to foster conversation and closeness without crossing moral lines. But reality was less chaste than the theory. Many bundling sessions ended in scandal, unwanted pregnancies, and shotgun weddings. And when a baby came before a marriage certificate, that woman's entire life could unravel. The medieval obsession with virginity turned women into walking reputations. One misstep, even a rumor, could ruin a girl forever. She might be shamed, exiled, or forced into a convent. Some women resorted to desperate, dangerous measures, herbal concoctions to fake virginity, or primitive, painful procedures to restore it. A wrong move could mean death by poisoning, or a life defined by disgrace. Men didn't get off lightly either. To win a woman's favor, a man had to prove himself, sometimes literally. Tournaments and jousts weren't just displays of chivalry. They were deadly contests where knights risked broken bones, crushed skulls, and impalement, all in the name of love. The romantic idea of the knight-errant wandering the land wasn't poetry, it was desperation wrapped in armor. And even if you succeeded in proving your worth, love still might not be enough. The economic stakes of medieval marriage were enormous. A poor man who married for love might be cast out by his lord, losing his land, income, and security. A noble who defied his family might be disinherited, stripped of title and wealth, reduced to begging or banishment. Choosing love was often the same as choosing ruin. The church didn't help. Its endless rules about who could marry whom turned courtship into a legal labyrinth. You might fall in love, only to find out you shared too close a bloodline. A papal dispensation could fix that, if you had enough money. If not, your love was invalid, forbidden, illegal. Even joyous events like religious festivals became battlegrounds. These celebrations, meant for worship and cheer, often turned into chaotic scenes of drunkenness and vulnerability. Women were warned not to attend without male protection. Many were assaulted or abducted during the festivities, crimes rarely punished, especially if the attacker had noble blood. Parents, fearing scandal, kept their daughters under near-constant surveillance. Windows were nailed shut, chaperones hovered, love letters were burned before they could be opened. And yet, couples still tried, still dared, still fell. But even a successful marriage wasn't safe from the looming threat of loss. The statistics were brutal. One or both newlyweds would likely be dead within a decade. Plague, childbirth, war, famine, take your pick. Wedding days carried an undercurrent of desperation. The joy was real, but so was the dread. And the wedding night, idealized as the climax of romance. Often traumatic, especially for young brides who had no understanding of sex, only that they were expected to endure it. Some were as young as 12 or 13. Their bodies weren't ready. Their minds even less so. Consent wasn't a concept, readiness wasn't a question, and if they became pregnant, the spiral of danger began. Women were expected to birth child after child, despite the toll it took. Miscarriages, stillbirths, infections, hemorrhaging, these weren't rare events, they were normal, they were expected. Death in childbirth wasn't a tragedy, it was just life. Those who survived marriage faced still more danger. Domestic violence wasn't just tolerated, it was protected. A man could beat his wife within reason, and he was the one who defined reason. If a woman complained too much, she risked being labeled disobedient, or worse, accused of witchcraft or adultery. Both charges could end with her burning at the stake. There was no police force, no shelters, no justice. Families often turned a blind eye to abuse, valuing family honor over safety. The church, when involved, usually preached endurance and prayer. Suffering, after all, was good for the soul, and children who grew up in such homes learned early that love meant power, that marriage was about survival, not joy, that tenderness was weakness, and the cycle repeated. Those who managed to find genuine love in this harsh world were rare, and often they didn't get to keep it. Star-crossed lovers, torn apart by war, death, or family politics, became legends, because they mirrored a universal truth. Even when love found a way, it didn't last. Romeo and Juliet might be fictional, but their story was painfully familiar to a medieval audience. These tales weren't just dramatic fiction, they were expressions of longing, yearning for a world where love didn't always lose. Because in reality, love almost always did. It lost to violence, to disease, to politics, to fear, to death. So next time you're frustrated with dating apps or awkward first dates, take a breath. You live in a world where love doesn't mean giving up your freedom, your family, or your life. A world where your heart is your own. And maybe, just maybe, that makes even the most imperfect modern romance worth celebrating. 701-6. As we draw this story to a close, let's take a final look back, not just at the heartbreak and horror, but at the strength it took for people to love in such a time. The medieval world wasn't just a hard place to fall in love, it was a place designed to stop you from doing so. From birth, people were sorted into roles, duties, and futures they never chose. A peasant girl wasn't dreaming of soulmates, she was hoping to survive childbirth. A noble son wasn't thinking about slow dances and whispered poems, he was wondering which marriage alliance would preserve his family's name, and yet the human spirit persisted. Somehow, even in a world riddled with plague, fire, superstition, war, and religious terror, people still fell for one another. They still passed secret notes, sang songs under windows, and carved hearts into wooden bedposts. They still believed, against all odds, that their feelings mattered. There's a quiet courage in that, a defiance. In a time where love could be your undoing, choosing to feel it anyway was a revolutionary act. Today, we might complain about awkward first dates, unanswered texts, or partners who don't load the dishwasher correctly. And yes, Those are real frustrations, but imagine instead having your marriage decided before you hit puberty, or risking execution for a stolen kiss, or giving birth by candlelight with no medicine, no doctor, and no guarantee that either of you would survive the night. The distance between then and now is wide, but the heart hasn't changed. We still want connection, still long for understanding, still ache for someone who sees us completely. And that desire, that need, is older than castles and kingdoms. It's the thread that connects us to the people who lived and loved centuries before we were born. When we read about their tragedies, their forced marriages, their forbidden affairs, we're not just looking back, we're recognizing ourselves in them. Our hopes, our fears, our reckless, messy attempts to be close to someone in a world that often pushes us apart. Maybe that's why so many medieval love stories still haunt us, because they remind us that love isn't always grand or easy or fair. Sometimes it's small and secret, sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's foolish, but it's always deeply human. So what can we take from this long, winding path through medieval romance? Maybe a bit of gratitude that we live in an age where we get to choose, where love isn't a political move or a religious mandate, where women aren't treated as property and marriage isn't a prison. Maybe a bit of perspective. That heartbreak, while painful, is rarely fatal. That ghosting and awkward breakups are preferable to dowry negotiations and plague-driven loss. And maybe a bit of wonder that despite everything, then and now, we still keep trying. We swipe, we flirt, we hope, we hurt. We write songs and poems and stupid little texts. We show up. We try again. Because love, for all its chaos and complication, remains one of the few things worth risking everything for. And as you drift off tonight, I hope you carry with you the soft realization that you are part of something ancient, that every time your heart leaps, breaks, or heals, you're echoing centuries of people who did the same, often under far crueler skies. Their courage to feel in a world that told them not to is the same courage it takes to be vulnerable today. So close your eyes now. Let the noise of the past grow quiet. Let the flickering torchlight fade into candlelight. Let the clanging of swords soften into the hush of a lover's breath. Let the weight of history settle, not as a burden, but as a blanket, heavy with meaning, warm with memory. You are safe, you are modern, you are free. And if you're lucky, perhaps you're also a little bit in love. Good night.